This meeting is being recorded.
I can't switch on my video for some reason. I don't have the permission to start my video. And the host has to.
I will just check that for you.
Thank you.
Me neither.
I will check that for you as well.
We've all tried to look good today, so I think put the video on.
That's right, Viraj.
Get connected to the main hall.
Yeah, it's working now.
Can I just ask you if you received a couple of slides that I sent you?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Gaurav. Good morning, Ghislaine. Morning, Rajat. Morning, Viraj. And morning to all the participants here. Can you hear me, Viraj, Rajat?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. And I welcome all the participants who have joined as audience also. This year, 2023, we are hosting the presidency with the theme One Earth, One Family, and One Future. Something about G20 to the basic audience. G20, we are hosting the presidency, as I said, and there are two tracks within G20. One is a finance track, which is managed by finance ministers of the G20. Second is a Sherpa track. Primarily, it has 13 working groups and other engagement groups. So Urban 20 is one of those engagement groups wherein a lot of focus in the cities, how cities of the future gonna be built. How do we bring in issues, perspectives of the city, and how do we, with this discussion, how do we enrich the overall G20 discussion? So this is where the Urban 20 has been built. So we have participants here. I'll introduce these participants. We have Gaurav Godwani. He's co-founder and director, CivicDataLab. I've seen some of his work in urban domain, setting up a city level platform. Then we have Ms. Ghislaine Kieffer, a policy analyst. She works in energy efficiency and cities. Dr. Rajat is here from a different perspective. She brings an economics perspective. He's a dean in the School of Humanities and Social Sciences, Shiv Nadar University. We also have Viraj Tyagi. He is the CEO of eGov Foundation. Viraj, of late, I've been working closely with Viraj and his team on digital public good. That would be a theme of today's discussion also. So, coming from a city perspective, India as a country is growing in urban domain. We know we almost have touched 500 million population in urban. If we look at the kind of investments required in a country, if we look at World Bank report, we see almost $800 billion would be required in the next 15 years, $55 billion of investments if our urban domain has to, start contributing to sustainable development. That's the kind of investments we are looking at in our urban domain. So today, typically from a scoping perspective, I would, kind of focus on two major things. One is from an infrastructure perspective, we look at infrastructure in mobility, security, healthcare, energy, water, waste, economic development and housing, and engagement and community. These are 8 areas which typically a city would be defined. And second, I would be focusing a lot on the citizen services perspective, the data perspective, the dashboards perspective, or city level platforms perspective. So as a first, question to all the participants, I'll start with Dr. Rajat first on you. So today's topic is on the digital urban future. So you can kind of maybe some introduction on city urban digital future from all the 4 participants, and then we take it forward from those basic scoping on this digital urban future. Over to you, Rajat. Yeah, Rajat.
Me? Yes. Okay. Thank you, Manpreet, and thank you, NIUA, for inviting me into this very timely discussion on urban futures and urban digital future of the city. So as an introductory comment, let me say that, digital economy is now looked upon as sort of another critical infrastructure that is required for growth, economic growth. And in the past, we had electricity. In the past, we had roads that were categorized as general purpose technologies that enabled growth to happen. And I think infrastructure, digital infrastructure, has acquired the same status of a general purpose technology. Only thing is, sometimes it becomes invisible. Unfortunately, in India, it's always visible. It's almost always visible. Very little of it is under the ground, but all the necessary, pipes, etc., they are a part of this digital infrastructure. So what is important for cities and what is important for the economy is that they have a multiplier effect on state level or city level or even national level GDP, just like electricity and roads had an impact on country well-being or country GDP. You remember a very good quotation by, I think it was John F. Kennedy, the President of the United States. He had mentioned that America has good roads not because it is rich. It is rich because it has good roads. And I think that's important to understand, even from the point of view of digital infrastructure. There are going to be multiplier effects of digital infrastructure on country well-being, on country GDP, on state GDP and city GDP. So that's the first point, really, that if we put this infrastructure in place, we'll get a bang for the buck. And the reason why we'll get this bang for the buck, Manpreet, is because it generates efficiencies in the markets. What digital technologies allow us to do, and you have seen so many new business models emerge, and I guarantee you none of these business models would have been possible without digital infrastructure. We've done a lot of research around the world and in India especially, which suggests that investments in certain assets would not have happened if there was this information flows were not made possible by digital infrastructure or by the internet or by the smart systems that we have in place. I'll give you an example. You know, a lot of people are investing in cars, in mobility today, and I've met a lot of taxi drivers, taxi owners of fleets of cars. They say our ability to invest in high-end fleet cars is made possible only because we can monitor where the car is going. We can monitor on a second by second or a minute by minute basis where the car is, where the driver is, etc., and where the stop is happening, what is the fuel usage, etc. I would not have been able to invest in a high-end car, a luxury car, if this was not possible, because I wouldn't know where my car was. So if you take this very simple idea and you expand it, because as a result of which information flows through the digital system are happening, it leads to new business models, it leads to greater efficiencies, it leads to much better monitoring of information. Of course, there are downsides, and I'll talk about that later, but essentially the point is a city in India, we talk about cities with 20 million people, right? I mean, we have very large and congested cities. So digital allows us so many things, not only new business models, sources of livelihoods, but it allows us to do things that we would not have been possible to do without access to digital infrastructure. So I can avoid meetings, I can avoid traveling, I can do things which are better for the environment, I don't need to travel so much, etc., etc. So the point of digital infrastructure is that it has spillover benefits. It's a general purpose technology. It allows new business models. It allows information to be shared for people to take more efficient decisions. It allows markets to work more efficiently. And it allows me to use my asset, much more often than I would have otherwise done, because asset sharing or platform sharing or sharing of assets becomes possible with the digital economy. So the possibilities are endless. I've talked about the positives. I'm happy to talk about the negatives later, but just to set the ball rolling, is cities that have large populations, especially populations densities that you see in India, in Bangladesh, in South Asia, in some of the East Asian cities, these benefit sort of much more from the investment in digital infrastructure than some other cities do, because it allows much more efficient decision making and avoids those congestion charges that we often have to pay, or congestions that we often have to see in such congested cities. So that's the positive sides of digital, and I think it's come as a boon. Technology has come as a boon for countries in South Asia, countries like India, because this allows more efficiency in the functioning of the market mechanism.
Thanks, Rajat. Now, Viraj, coming to you. Now, we have seen in last 10 years of e-governance. I have personally been party to when we implemented birth certificate in 2011. We had 31 versions of birth certificate applications. Every state has its own version, right? And again, proprietary, people got stuck in a lot of technologies. Vendors had lock-in, vendors went away. So how do you see the digital public good, the open source solutions? They are making a way, a platform-based approach. They are making a way. especially Viraj, apart from citizen services. I know you've done a lot of work with citizen services involved. Now I want maybe look at other perspectives of e-governance also. How do you build a solid waste solutions on a platform? How do you build maybe pollution monitoring, STP monitoring, other work apart from citizen service? I know you have done a great amount of work in citizen services, be it sanitation and all. Touch upon citizen services angle, but again touch upon the other facets of city. How do you bring in those open source? Talking about maybe our country can have one solution for all ICCCs in the country. That's the kind of vision at least I have under National Urban Digital Mission, a futuristic vision. So over to you, Viraj.
No, thanks, Manpreet, and great to be here. And thank you, NIU, and good to be with the other panelists. Very interesting discussion. So I think a couple of things. One is when you look at city as a accumulation of people and economic activity, transactions, interactions, and data exchange is very important. Information flow, what Doctor was referring before this. And I think there are multiple ways of solving it. And I think digital public goods come into actually handling three things. One is how do you make, reduce the cost of transaction for everybody in the system, okay? Not just the citizen, but also the employee who's in the front line and the administrator and the other people who want to build something on top of it. So that's and then how do you do it at scale and with equity? So not just the big cities of India, like Bombay and Chennai get the advantage of it, but also small cities like, Longowal and Gurdaspur and all those cities also have access to the same technology, because let's not forget, of the 4,700 cities in India, almost 4,000 are less than 30,000 people. Okay, but those are also a set of economic activities, and people get together and generate GDP there. So there's digital that we all understand. The public nature of digital public good is that they're basically available to everybody without any access barriers. So you can argue that Google Maps is a digital public good, but it's not a public good, it's a digital good. Because there are access barriers and there are costs you have to pay on that. And one is there's no access barrier. Second is it is by the nature is open source. There is no limitation on how many people can use it. Okay, so both are important, right? So open sourcing makes it available to other people to use it without needing to talk to anybody. Okay, so that's the right. And that's why it leads to good in terms of, whether it reduces cost of, transactions, handles diverse use cases, and it improves information flow. So I think the principles are very important in this, that you actually build it so that from day one, it has not just an open source code, but also open specifications and standards. So other people they don't have to look at only one code. They can say, I can actually build my own code using these specifications and standards. So that's the first thing. Then you need to have trusted registries in the system. So one of the issues in the city is the same piece of land is defined in different ways by 30 different departments. If I'm the revenue department, I look at it in a different angle. If I'm a sanitation department, and that's why you have all these cases of yesterday the road was late, today it's been dug up by somebody. So having trusted registries of assets and actors which are reusable by everybody. So if I'm if a property ownership changes, automatically the water ownership should change, the electricity ownership should change, all the things which are linked to property should change. So registries are very important. Third thing is the information exchange. How do you create, trusted and timely information? That's very important, because I think if you look at the human side of it, how do the citizens get the information about where to get what from the city? Okay, how does a employee gets information about what they need to do on that particular day? And how does the administrator get the information about what are the issues facing a particular area in the city? All three are important, right? So that's the third part. Now, coming to your point about how do you create, infrastructure and conditions for innovation to happen? That's essentially how can you handle multiple use cases? And that's where I think platforms play a big role, that they try to, in a way, create common services. So if you imagine some of the work that we have done in urban municipal services, for example, most services in any even rural will need a workflow, that an application comes in, how does it flow? But that doesn't need to be specific to a kind of application. Birth and death can have can configure the same workflow. So can a water connection, so can a complaint. Okay. lot of services need billing, and collection. Again, that can be. So the shared services are third. You have registries, you have data exchange, and shared services. Shared services with open APIs give you that flexibility to build diverse solutions. So in fact, when we build sanitation solutions, 90% of the services were used from what we built for municipal, right? Of course, we had to add new things like you have to track a movement of a truck and stuff like that. When we build health, delivering mosquito bed nets, again, 60-70% of services were used, but obviously there was specific services you need to build for health use case. So reusability is a very important concept when you design DPGs, right? Reusability and interoperability. So can it work with other DPGs, right? Can we work with other existing solutions? Because you don't want to disrupt it. So I think those are 3 or 4 things that, interoperability, reusability, openness, not just of the code, but the knowledge.
Right.
So nobody's locked in. You don't want another kind of vendor lock-in where you're locked into a particular, source code or even if it's open. Okay. So I'll pause here. This is a topic I can talk the whole day. So.
It's a very relevant topic, Viraj, you touched upon. I work with Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. Right now, I may not know the number of cities that our country has. Somebody talks about 4750, somebody talks about 4700. Names varies across missions. Maybe, numbers and names varies across mission.
Yeah.
That's a kind of challenge, a very basic challenge we struggle at our national level. Obviously, registry is going to play a very big role. That's what we're going to envisage in a national dashboard, wherein some core data sets, maybe number of cities, name of the cities, population, GDP of a state, we're going to have it as a core data set in national dashboard. That's how we're going to, spread across multiple missions and multi-projects. That's what we are envisaging under National Urban Digital Mission. Moving to Ghislaine. Ghislaine, your views on the topic, catalyzing urban digital futures, some scoping, kind of your thoughts on it.
Thank you very much, Manpreet. This is a fascinating discussion, and thanks to all the panelists, and thanks for inviting me to NIUA. So if you can share I have 4 slides because I come at this from an energy perspective, and I thought this would be a good opportunity. So I will just describe. I had to think a lot about the 4 key slides I wanted to show you in this discussion. And we just, if you go to the next slide, so we just discussed the definition of what is a city. So working at the International Energy Agency, I come to this from an energy and an environmental perspective. And with growing urbanization trends that we can see, the central role of cities will keep increasing. Currently, so taking a global perspective, cities account for more than 50% of the planet's population, 80% economic output, and 2/3 of global energy consumption, and 70% of global carbon emissions. And by 2050, more than 70% of the world's population will live in cities. In aggregate, this means that all of the 2 billion population increase over the period from now to 2050 is added to cities and towns. So this will result in a massive demand growth for urban energy infrastructure, of which digital is now a core part. So these new urbanizing areas represent a major opportunity for carbon lockout. And if you go to the next slide, the IEA has done quite a bit of work on digitalization and energy efficiency in the context of cities. The little report covered, you can see here, is a report we developed for the G20 presidency a couple of years ago, where we looked at the interplay of digital technologies and the different end uses in a city. From an energy viewpoint, cities have energy grids, buildings, transport system, municipal services. So we deconstruct cities in a slightly different way, but everything that you said resonates deeply. And in this report, we try to look at case studies of where digital solutions can help make cities cleaner and more energy efficient. By 2024, we expect close to 100 billion connected devices and sensors that will be generating huge data sets on a wide range of topics such as energy consumption, air quality, traffic patterns. And of course, advanced analytics and a range of new tools can now allow us to combine these data sets from different domains and transform them into information that can support better decision-making for better urban planning and more efficient operation and provision of urban services. So if you look at the next slide, I just wanted to give a snapshot. This is the India energy outlook that we published in 2021, where we have different scenarios. The step scenarios is the stated policy scenario. So it's a balanced assessment of the direction in which India's energy system is heading based on today's policy settings and constraints. And the key trend that we see here is that cooling systems are becoming a major driver for the increased variability of electricity demand. By 2040, more than 1 billion air conditioners and fans we estimate will be purchased, which will significantly raise the evening peak. And this, you can see the difference between the highest point of demand and the lowest reaches over 200 gigawatts. This is the size of Germany's electricity sector today. So why am I talking about this? Of course, this calls for improvement in the efficiency of buildings envelope, minimum energy performance standards for air conditioning, but very importantly for demand response programs. And for power systems all over the world and in India to become more flexible and dynamic, to better match, for example, solar power production from rooftop PVs with peaks in residential consumption. All of this will be enabled by data and digital tools. And then in my last slide, I wanted to give an example of a grid interactive efficient building. So in a modern net zero future, most buildings would be equipped with a range of digital technologies together with energy efficiency measures and on-site renewable energy production and storage. So grid interactive efficient buildings are buildings that adopt smart systems for their operations and that have a two-way grid interaction with the electricity grid to enable further efficiencies. So notably, for example, by analyzing data from various sources such as heating, ventilation, air conditioning, motion sensors, weather, they can create real-time insights and forecasts to optimize energy use and grid management at the same time. And so this goes to the point, you can see the various curves at the bottom of the slide show the energy consumption of a typical commercial building, then lower consumption for an energy efficient building. And then if we add a rooftop PV, you can see the famous duck curve where the goal here is to better match demand with the solar production. And this can be enabled by digital solutions which allowed the system and the building to be more flexible in the way it consumes energy. So digital, from the energy perspective, digital is a key solution to make buildings and what are cities, if not constellations and aggregations of buildings. So these are just a few slides. Thank you.
That's really wonderful, Ghislaine. And 500 million of air conditioners India will have. That's enormous kind of heat it'll produce is really enormous, really. Coming back to Gaurav, we are just trying to scope in on our today's discussion, catalyzing digital urban future. Viraj has talked about open source. Rajat has talked about overall technology, the digital part of it. Ghislaine has talked about energy efficiency. I know your strength has been the data part of it. So vis-a-vis data part, vis-a-vis your initiative on city level platform. So kind of scoping on this discussion, Gaurav.
Thank you, Manpreet, for having me here, and thanks to the U20 team. I think my perspective would be on how cities can exchange much more data and information with each other. So our recent work with NIC as well as Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology is looking into creating India Data Platform, which is a platform which would be connecting all the existing data sets in the country at one place, as well as allowing G2G, government to government exchange, government to businesses, government to civil societies, research institutes, R&D, etc. purposes could be served from one platform. This platform is trying to implement the National Data Governance Framework policy. And what we're trying to do here is to bring anonymized data sets from various stakeholders at one place, and also enable especially cities to unlock the power of data sets which they have been collecting through urban services, through other mechanisms like satellite imagery, other kind of data sets like transport, which is being sitting with the cities, but they're not able to harness it well. So that's what we are looking at the moment. And what is interesting in this data platform, which we are looking at, is the agreements between the data provider and the data consumer are actually based on the kind of usage the data consumer would like. So we clearly demand what are the kind of use cases data consumer would like to see from the data provider, and that would be baked into an agreement which would be digital in nature and which would enable more data sharing between the cities. It would help people to have a regular dialogue on what are the kind of new innovations cities are doing. And at the same time, it would help R&D institutes, startups who are fourth runners in terms of artificial intelligence, in terms of machine learning, those kind of solutions that this could be brought in through database APIs coming from this platform. That's the goal which we are trying to aim. Now, there is a lot of innovation which is happening in our cities, but most of these are get locked in their ecosystem, and there are silos which are being created just because cities have a lot to chase on. There are a lot of digital services which they are working on, and the whole data scoping exercise, the data protection exercise, the ethical data use case exercise, all these exercises take time and energy. So what this platform is hoping to do is create much more data dialogues where cities can learn their best practices from other cities, as well as share what is working in their use case with others. We are already seeing some sort of early adoption from especially cities in Assam, where these data dialogues are already started to happen from last year, where they are sharing how public procurement data, which is an important data in terms of how business participation, ease of doing business could be improved for a city, could be shared on data platform, and how the bid participation, how the bidding process has been, whether pre-bid meetings are happening on time, etc. All that information is being digitized and is being shared. More than 33,000 tenders have already been published on data.gov.in. This information could be used by other cities to understand what are the best practices, especially if the Guwahati Municipal Corporation is following, and how can that procurement process could be much more opened up. So as Viraj was saying, that it should not be just the open source or the open data. Ultimate aim is the open knowledge and open governance, which could be enabled with these kind of data platforms. So that's what we are trying to work with. We are seeing some early insights from cities like Guwahati, and hoping that other cities can also learn from it. Similarly, I think there is an adoption of open source software, especially when it comes to disaster risk reduction. More and more cities are now looking at unlocking what are the kind of open source solutions and open data sets like satellite imagery from Bhuvan, Sentinel 2.0 could be leveraged to better plan for natural disasters like floods, cyclones, etc. So we are seeing increasing uptake of sort of data models being built in collaboration with platforms like ours to see how there could be more strengthened early warning system and disaster risk reduction practices set up in our cities, and better plan for peak monsoon seasons, identify what kind of procurements need to be done before the monsoon season, where the energy needs to be invested in terms of wards which are much more vulnerable to certain kind of flooding, certain kind of disaster prone areas, and also see where do we need much more help in terms of post-disaster response, how much recovery time currently happens, how can we accelerate that? That's something which the broader goal is. And now cities are also thinking about things like climate financing, things like green budget. All of those could be accelerated with the kind of data sets which are being unlocked now, which cities are sitting on. So things like smartcity.data.gov.in, data.gov.in, and India Data Platform, these kind of data platforms enable this kind of regular data exchange among cities and build the necessary capacity of several stakeholders to work with city data.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So Gaurav, a quick question. Almost 5 years back, we presented to the Punjab cabinet our Chief Minister dashboard, CM dashboard. It had performance of around 200 schemes, and we wanted to make it public. Straight away, it was a no. Have things changed at the policy front to share the public data, scheme data, all these data? Just quick answer so that we can move to the next one.
Right. I think the policy is already enabling. National Data Sharing and Accessibility Policy of 2012 and the guidelines after that are quite enabling in terms of sharing data. But what we need is more capacity building. So just in last 5 years, we have seen Assam, Odisha, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala share their budgetary data, which all of them were not sharing in machine readable format, just few hours after the budget is being presented in the assembly. And this is very enabling because whatever urban and housing development department's priorities are, all of that are logged in that document. And those are like thousands of PDFs which you have to go through. Now with these machine readable data sets, all that analysis is just fast enough. So I think capacity building with state departments as well as municipal corporations might result into much more preparedness towards open data. That's where I see our maximum opportunity.
That's good. Coming to Rajat, list, because India being a developing country, what are those social economic indicators, which you see we need to monitor in urban domain with digital tools, and kind of mode with which we'll monitor? How do you see the output coming in the next 3 years? The social economic indicators, Rajat.
Yeah, thanks, Manpreet. So let me sort of, in answering this question, let me try and aggregate some of the things that have been said and put them in a perspective so that I can answer the question better, which is that, a city has agglomeration effects. That's why a city is so efficient. There are these agglomeration effects. And when you talk about social economic indicators, you can't, I guess you do talk about urban areas, but for a country like India, you can't ignore rural areas. And I'll tell you why. The agglomeration effects mean that people will come to cities. They will come to cities in search of jobs. People will come to cities in search of better amenities, schools, better hospitals, better healthcare, better roads, etc. Whatever. So agglomeration effects is what excites people and inspires people to move to cities. So I think one of the indicators that we must measure is migration. Where are these? Migration is absolutely essential. Occupational structure is extremely essential. Where are they living? What is the kind of housing they have? How many people are below the poverty line? How many people have access to drinking water, potable water? How many people have access to services, smartphones? All these indicators are important at the national level also. These are important, as I was saying, at the rural level also, but they become very important for cities because cities are, the engines of growth. And to make cities the engines of growth, digital tools will help, access to such data will help. But that's only an enabling provision. We can't, what Viraj has said, what Ghislaine has said, what Gaurav has said, if you tie all that together, digital public goods, implementation, use of data, AI tools, better energy efficiency, etc. And data has to be used in a manner that it can drive these growth efforts. So let me give you, some examples of how we can better use this data. And I think Gaurav said it really well. Again, I'm going to, contextualize it in the framework of India, but it can be applicable to any other country. We talk about competitive federalism. Why did we talk about competitive federalism so much? We talked about it so much because states can learn from one another and compete with one another, not the race to the bottom, but states should compete with one another and thereby grow. And Gaurav said this really well. From the state, if you transport this idea to the city, then cities in the G20, urban cities, can compete with one another, and that can be enabled with data sharing. And if cities share data with one another, they can learn from the best practices, because it is cities where these problems of solid waste management, we talk about smart cities in India, and I'm still struggling, and I've been working on this for the last 15 years, and I'm struggling with, how would you define a smart city for India? Where access to sanitation, access to solid waste management, where there are mounds of garbage lying, on the outskirts of the city. What does it mean to be smart? Is Singapore model applicable to us, where they deliver good quality services to citizens at the touch of the button without having to incur those transactions costs that Viraj talked about? What is a smart city in the context of India? So I think with the collection of the data across all domains that we have mentioned, and I won't repeat them, across all domains, and using that data for the benefit of the city and learning from the best practices that have been incorporated in cities in India. There are examples, but what worries me is that we have all this data, we have digital tools, and we can implement them. What digitalization teaches us is that they should be independent of the people. They should be driven by institutions. If you see what I'm saying, Mantri. Institutional-led data usage growth, whether it's better solid waste, it's better transportation, and as you said, better housing, creating all those dashboards, they should be independent of the leaders in positions in power in the municipal corporations, because it should be driven by the system. The good practices we see in India in cities, and there are examples, as I said, have been driven by individuals because they've been passionate, they want to do things. And of course, that's also always a good thing. We can learn from them. But can we get that individual out of the equation and have a system-driven approach to growth? That's where digital will become the most powerful tool for us in India. So, I mean, the indicators, as I said, are the ones that I've indicated, and they can be used for better. I'll say that in the next question that you ask me also. Yeah.
Right.
Thanks.
So Rajat, it was good to know the institutionalizing the whole benchmark process and going away from individuals. So under National Urban Digital Mission, we are building a national urban dashboard, wherein you mentioned about measuring an SLA. Supposedly, a city issues a trade license in 2 days. Another city issues a trade license on an average in 7 days, right? Now, if I benchmark 2 with 7, 2 is a best practice, system driven. I have to study how 2 issues it. Does it require a lot of documentation? How many documents they ask for issuing a trade license? Pick up that best practice, take it to 7, bring 7 to 2. That's the kind of institutionalizing you're talking about, right?
Exactly.
So similarly, we'll have this in another services also. Viraj is smiling at me that yes, that was intent with which Viraj was involved in National Urban Digital Mission, envisioning part of it. So Viraj, we see.
So let me give you Manpreet, let me give you an example. So right of way clearance in a city for establishing digital infrastructure, how long does it take? Some cities do it, online. Some cities will take days to do it, and there's a lot of rent to be had in right of way clearances. That's another example of where you can become efficient by benchmarking yourself with a good city.
Right. So Viraj, coming to you, you've worked a lot in urban domain, especially in the citizen services domain. So I had two questions from you. One is, typically in India, in urban domain, there are many initiatives around data per se. We have a national urban dashboard. We have Amplify in NIU and Ministry, some outcome framework within NIU and MAUA, many missions producing a lot of data. So how do you see, and again, an organization like, Gaurav's organization, CivicDataLab, doing a lot of work on open data. How do you see the future of, convergence of a good data and coming up to a good national urban dashboard? That's one question. Second, very importantly, connecting that, when we measure the efficiency of citizen service delivery, we talked about the feedback loop. How do we measure citizen service effectiveness in urban area? We talked about a feedback loop we have been talking almost every month on the feedback loop. How good is the quality of service delivery? So these two areas in urban domain, if you can touch upon, Viraj.
Yeah, data is always a fascinating conversation. I've worked in data before that in a startup. I think there are two things about data which I want to highlight. One is, I think sometimes you can have a view which is top down, okay? Saying, I want to look at in a national dashboard what's happening in the state. I think data as a basic currency of human interaction is basically empowering to actors who are involved in doing something together, consuming a service, providing a service. So I think one of the best examples of data and how it changes system we've seen in Andhra Pradesh over the last 5 years, where they have open dashboards. Okay. And one thing is, data has to be trustworthy and it has to be without friction. The issue with collecting multiple data sets is the interoperability becomes an issue, right? So in AP, all the services people consume are emitted as events as it does on Upyog, which is, and Digit. And those events are available real time on a dashboard that anybody can see the system. So let's say I launch a complaint as a citizen, I would see who it is assigned to. I get the information real time. So I have the information as a citizen. Something is happening to my complaint, has been assigned to this person. The person who is supposed to solve it, that's also data, what he gets on his inbox, that I need to solve this garbage dump, which is in my ward, okay? When it is solved, it emits the information again for citizen to do the feedback. Is it done or not, okay? And then it's available on the dashboard by urban local body, by ward, by department, real time, that how many complaints came, how many were resolved, how many are within SLA. And if there is outside SLA, you can go into complaint and see the whole timeline. So this is all data. So it's empowering the citizen in the sense of knowing something is happening to what is being done. It is empowering to the employee. They know what they need to do and they can do it much more efficiently. It is empowering to the administrators. They can decide where the performance is good. Why is this particular ward, there 40% of this thing is outside SLA. So, okay. Why this particular officer in sanitation is not able to solve the problems, right? And whole of the system view is that when we started in 2016, they used to have 15,000 complaints a year in the whole of state. And that's not because people did not have complaints, because there were no efficient data exchange happening versus all the actors to make the system work, okay? Once this data started being open and this information started coming to them, the system itself went into a virtuous cycle. The citizen knows if I do something, something happens. Somebody asks me it happened or not. Employees knows I don't have to go to the municipal office every day to complain, get my complaints. And the administrator knows what is happening. So this is one part of it. Second part, in terms of trying to do it at scale, okay? Again, I go back to this. Importance of having trusted registries, which basically say, this is a house, which is residential house, which is, whether it's a water connection, whatever, that's important. And importance of having, data standards and specs that says, and which is one of the work, we are doing very well in NUDM, Manpreet, which is saying, as long as you, as long as you follow these standards, doesn't matter which system you use, your data is compliant, is interoperable and can be compared in a fair manner, right? Other thing is the scale. For scale, you need systems which are able to, emit events whenever something happens. So a lot of data, whenever somebody touches data for aggregation, you can assume that that data will have some fidelity issue, right? That's when all those Excel sheets that keep floating here to there, so we know the story of that Excel sheet. But if it is an event-based architecture, like Digit has, like Upyog has, then there's fidelity and the speed of travel of data is taken out. There's no friction in that. If it is friction, it's a frictionful process of saying, "Aapko MIS ka data har mahine de, you have to give this every month. You have to, upload it in this portal." It's again, it cannot scale. Correct. The coordination issues will become too hard to solve for.
Correct. Thanks, Viraj. Viraj, we are also right now looking at one parameter. We're looking at India as a country's revenue, city revenue, property tax collection, and the data we have right now is in a very bad shape. Some of the reports says we are 0.15% of GDP, some says 0.3% of GDP, some say 0.5% of GDP. And we're struggling, right now we're struggling. But with National Urban Dashboard, we have almost integrated 6 states in process.
Yes.
At least for 6 states, we'll be able to tell you, tell country that, this is my actual property tax collection. This is my property tax collection per GDP. I can benchmark a city with another. I can benchmark a state with another. That's another vision we're looking at a national dashboard apart from the citizen services. Coming to Ghislaine. Ghislaine, I've got 2 questions from audience also for you, plus some of the challenges I would like to discuss. So there's a question. Are there any distinct cooling examples from India or Latin America? That's one question. And there's a bigger, longer questions. Thanks for bringing in about the grid interactive efficient buildings for optimizing the energy use. The graph in the previous slide shows an enormous surge of electricity demand in residential sector. How do you recommend to strategize the transition of conventional to GI buildings by 2040? And how do you see the legislation, country, national level policy perspective to it? Just quick answer to this. And how do you see in a developing country the typical energy challenges you will have going forward? Because in a developing countries, you see a lot of infrastructure creation, a lot of offices creation, countries, people are getting richer, so affordability is getting more. So how do you see in a developing countries the energy efficiency challenges?
Okay, thank you very much for all of these questions. The last one is I could spend a long time to answer, so I'll try to do like acupuncture, give you little examples or points. So on district cooling in India, I am not aware from the top of my head of such example, but I can ask colleagues within the IEA and get back to you with some examples for sure. You mentioned Singapore. I know Singapore has an amazing example of district cooling, but again, it is Singapore. But I'll definitely get back to you on this one. Then on how we can transition to grid interactive efficient buildings, I think there are a few things that we can do. First is allow the participation of aggregators in electricity markets, allow distributed energy resources to provide services to the grids, mandate smart meters and smart grid infrastructure. We are talking about data very much in this conversation today, so rules on data collection, cybersecurity, and privacy. It's interesting, we haven't mentioned cybersecurity and privacy as such yet, but in the energy domain, that is a key consideration whenever we talk about digital and data. And then, of course, so these are mostly regulations, but from a policy perspective, so the decentralization of power systems and better utilization of existing grid infrastructure. And also we have regulatory sandboxes for distributed, so the whole system and is shifting more towards decentralization to also enable the use of distributed and local renewables. And in India, this is a key, of course, opportunity because of the availability of great solar, for example, in some Indian states. And last but not least, enabling the power of trade among prosumers and consumers. So peer-to-peer, and then you have a host of technologies such as blockchain and the like. So just to give a snapshot, and on the conversation about efficiency in emerging economies, I highlighted a few points. I think cities are a key aspects and the local level to bring together the different end users so that the silos in policy making between the transport sector, the building sector, and urban planning per se are brought together. So again, I think the data plays a crucial role in bringing these considerations together. And we see with GIS tools, geospatial information tools, we can see a refinement in how we're capable nowadays of identifying where the highest energy use is in a city, for example, or in a sector. For example, waste water treatment plants are key areas where huge energy efficiency gains can be made. Street lighting and India has done remarkable progress in this. These are just a few examples I can share from in a very succinct manner, and happy to give you more by email.
I think I'll take away two things from you. The emerging tech part of it, you talked about blockchain. Second, you talked about GIS as an enabler. And under our mission, National Urban Digital Mission, Viraj, you know, we are right now in discussion with NRSC, National Remote Sensing Center. We're almost signing an MOU wherein we'll be helping cities to map their properties using the platform we have developed. They have an open source platform, Bhuvan, they have developed for Telangana state. We'll be utilizing it, replicating it in other states so that, you know, at least that portion gets covered under National Urban Digital Mission. Coming to Gaurav, got two questions for you. One question is, if you're given a mandate that choose 3 data sets in a smaller city in a country like India, which 3 data sets would you choose to do research on for longer urban sustainable future? Second question, maybe 1 or 2 innovation success stories around those data sets. Quick one, maybe. I know we'll not have much time, but a quick one, yes.
Thank you, Manpreet. So my top 3 data sets are: number 1, municipal corporation budgets and accounts information. I think that's already digitized in most of the municipal corporations. And starting from municipal corporations and then to all ULBs, if we can get the budget as well as the accounts information in public domain, that would be great. Second, I think cities are procuring a lot, and that's where the businesses have a huge opportunity to engage with them. And there's also a way to see what are certain priorities cities are needing at the moment and how we can better facilitate that. So getting the public procurement data out and open, standardized, as Viraj was saying, using open contracting data standards, it would be super helpful. And third, I think citizen complaints. There are now digital platforms which are collecting a lot of citizen complaints, and Ahmedabad has already started to think opening up of this data set. So there are more cities who can learn from them. So opening up these data sets and making them accessible to citizens, that would help us analyze what are those seasonality patterns which emerge on a yearly basis or on a monthly basis, which we have to tackle and prepare for. So these three would be my top data sets. Some of the success stories, I think I would go back to Assam, where the climate preparedness models are now being developed using 72 data parameters coming from more than 30 data sets. Earlier, these were done with just 4 or 5 data parameters coming from 1 or 2 data sets. So there's a huge change in terms of how Assam State Disaster Management Authority and Guwahati Municipal Corporation is looking into collating and collecting data sets for better preparedness for especially floods, because it's a flood prone area. So the release of funds to the wards as well as to the revenue circles are now happening based on this algorithmic approach rather than simple mathematical analysis. And I think another one is a Cognicity software, which is being used in Indonesia and Philippines to report civic issues as well as complaints during disasters, especially floods, cyclones. Southeast Asia is quite prone to natural disasters. So the same software is being deployed in Indonesia and Philippines, and now India and a couple of other Asian countries are keen to adopt similar software for civic engagement and reporting issues on how the disaster response and damages are happening during case of natural hazards. So such case studies need to be made more public and more discussed in public so that people can adopt from it and cities can learn better from each other.
Thanks, Gaurav. Now, last maybe 1 minute buzzer round question to all of you. India is a country which is growing. You know, if you look at municipal revenues, 1% of GDP. 0.25% comes from property tax or tax revenue. 0.25 comes from non-tax revenue. User charges, collection, trade license fees. 0.5% comes from government grants, central, state, financial commission grants. Cities are smaller, they are unplanned. A country like India was struggling with capacity to one clerk in a smaller ULB does every IT work, be data entry of Swachh Bharat, data entry of birth certificate. So in a contextualized view in a country like India, smaller city, how do you see capacity and the revenue funding part of it in the next 3 years in a country like India? Just a quick 1 minute question. We'll start with Rajat, being an economist.
You want a 1 minute answer to a complicated political economy question. Manpreet, I think the answer in India's context is that greater decentralization, obviously, but it's not going to easily. We've done the administrative decentralization to those 73rd and 74th amendments. Unfortunately, the financial decentralization, the empowerment of the administration has not happened. So there's no point doing administrative decentralization unless there is also some financial authority. And I saw one question in your chat box saying, what are the problems with creating infrastructure in cities? Well, this is one of the problems of creating infrastructure in cities, apart from the fact that you have capacity constraints and what Ghislaine also talked about, where data sets need to talk to each other and you don't operate in silos, especially in transport. Transport cannot be a silo. You can't have metros and buses and other forms of transport looking independently of each other. They have to be sort of coordinated. But I think to give a quick bullet point answer to your question, much more power decentralized even in raising of finances, including property taxes and parking fees. Property taxes and parking fees happen to be some of the under-tapped sources of revenue. And parking fees in congested cities should go through the roof. They should really go through the roof, despite the political opposition that might happen. Of course, you need to create adequate alternatives, but you should make it prohibitively high so that people use much more public transport. I mean, there are lots of nuances here, but I think I'll stop here to a very difficult question. Yes.
Viraj, you 1 minute on it. You mute us, it seems. Viraj, you're mute. Yeah.
Dr. Rajat has already said a few things, but I think from a DPG perspective, one is having, efficiency in the processes. So we've seen for the same property tax rates for the same cities, you can increase property tax 2 times by just having more efficient way of billing, collection, and tracking it. So I think having those mechanisms at scale are very important. Okay. From a capacity point of view, again, I think important thing is typically when we talk to people about platforms which are well designed, some of the surveys we've done, an employee have told us, on Digit in Punjab, actually, that they send 12 to 14 hours every week. So that reduces capacity. So I think we can never forget the human side of it, that ultimately it's humans we lead to capacity. And if we give them tools and job aids to do their job better, that automatically expands the capacity. And finally, for decision makers, if they have data without friction, reliable data, they don't have to worry about collating data and reporting data and getting collation. They can just look at data, which is they don't have to think twice this data is reliable or not, and make decisions with confidence. That will increase the capacity to make policy decisions at scale, right? So I'll pause here.
One way the digital it has happened is some of the states, they publish top 1,000 defaulters of property tax on their website.
Yeah.
As soon as they publish it, it starts getting paid.
Yep.
Again, a digital intervention, start helping. Andhra does it very effectively. Top 1,000 defaulters, and people start paying it. Ghislaine, your last 1 minute to it. Ghislaine, can you hear me?
Yes, sorry, I was just unmuting myself. So this is, as we said, a very tough question, political, economic question. I would not venture on this topic, given the subtlety of India's governance system. But I would say from my perspective, two things. If we look at, and this goes with the sharing of municipal corporations' budget, if we see those highest energy consuming services and sectors, and we target those to do upgrades in the efficiency of systems. And I will just take the example of street lighting, which very often falls within the purview of municipal corporations. And in some cities can represent huge proportion of municipal budgets. But cities often lack the capital to invest upfront in those upgrades. So having a clear conversation about fiscal transfers from national or state government to do upgrades where this money will be recuperated very quickly, and where, of course, emissions and quality of service will also benefit. I think that's probably my recommendation. And India has already done a lot of work. Has replaced in the national street lighting program, has installed 10 million smart LED street lights. But I hear now that some municipalities are not paying the electricity bills. They're lower, but so, it's always a political economy issue. Maybe I will just end with this paradox.
No, that's an initiative which this government has taken, the replacing the streetlights with the LED ones. Last word, Gaurav, yours.
Mine would be just three things. Number one, try to reuse rather than recreate. There's a lot of software, data, knowledge already existing, and we are working to open it up as much as possible. So rather than recreating something, try reusing them. Second, open up whatever you have created. Open source it, document it better, try to share whatever data you have created. And third, especially on the capacity part, I think we have enormous local talent in these cities, which is waiting to be unlocked. How can we better engage with the local talent, engage better with sharing the local practices at the global level? That needs much more thinking. And that's where I think our major cost savings and innovations are waiting to happen.
Thanks, Gaurav. There are a couple of questions on NIUA. Yes, NIUA has established Center for Digital Governance for taking up all the digital initiatives around citizen service delivery and also on the Smarter Cities initiative. So going forward, you will see more digital coming up from NIUA, and we'll be kind of working on the convergence of different digital initiatives around urban areas. And it was such a wonderful session. And thank you everyone, Rajat, Viraj, Ghislaine, Gaurav, thanks a lot. We did a very good discussion on policy, process, tech, data, all the friends in urban, and I'm sure we will release a communique on this. And thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Tarun.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, everyone.